In my time in this fandom, I focused my analyses on very specific aspects of the story of BSD. Most of the time, those aspects are simply characters and their motivations, and obviously, those are more up to interpretation. For example, some people may believe that Konekira didn't really love Sasaki, and instead, just believed that she fit the ideals he has, while I believe that his love for her is genuine, especially since he mourns her well into the story. However, no video I've made so far has been so deeply ingrained into the basis of BSD as a franchise. I'm talking about the reason why things are the way they are. The motive of both our villains and our heroes. And that, of course, is the existence of war in BSD. A common theme I've seen discussed is the fact that BSD is strictly anti-war, and we see that most in Yosono's backstory and of course in the existence of Fukuji, a character who acts as a puppet of the highly influential people around him. But if you've read BSD properly, you'll know that everything of the manga, be it love or trauma, is never just a plot point that gets resolved, but something that we see in the fine cracks of the story itself. I'm talking about in the little expressions or the throwaway lines that one wouldn't think even matters. And war as a theme is no exception to that pattern. So today, let's really look into it with our critical lenses. Right off the bat, I'm sorry everyone for disappearing for so long. This video took a very long time to make, and I'm working on another one and another one at the same time. But let's make up for it today, once and for all. As always, this video will be divided into sections. The first will be a summary and an objective discussion about the war. The second will be its effects on society, and the third, the part that I'm most excited for, will be on how the war affected the treatment of ability users. So, thinking caps on. Let's go through every relevant light novel we can, reread the manga, and discuss. The first instance of the war being mentioned is when Fukuji and Fukuzawa break up. I know guys, Yaoi caused the war. An interesting parallel I see to Fukuzawa and Rampo versus the other cast is that they had it relatively easier, especially more so than the girl that was called an angel of death for doing what she had to against her will, and the black wraith of the mafia. And it's so obvious too in the way particularly Fukuzawa views the world around him, but more on that later. First off, let me explain what exactly the war we're talking about is. The Great War, okay, first things first, I don't know what was so great about it, is named after the First World War, before, there were two of them, but it's important to know that it's not in fact meant to be that war, instead just a fictional placeholder for it. It took place in Europe, and the next part is a little bit hard to explain, so let me use a diagram here. So a few countries including France and Germany were on one side, and England and its allies were on the other. However, it's important to note that the war was mainly led by organizations, not countries. In respect to that, it was basically a feud between the organization called the the Transcendents, and the Order of the Clock Tower, an organization that has been mentioned by name many times and is led by Agatha. A good chunk of people don't know about the Transcendents, but this is basically the organization that Rambo and Verlaine work for and also are on the same level of prestige and power as the Order of the Clock Tower. Also, Shakespeare's in Transcendence, so that's fun. Anyways, the important thing to remember is that Japan actually allied with Germany and France for this war, therefore going against England. And mind you, the Order of the Clock Tower is England's huge organization. So when the time comes for them to appear in the main manga, I don't think Agatha will be sympathetic towards the agency. But there's no information on when it started or how long it's going to last. This incident is basically the crux of BSD and everything within our universe. So to drive home how significant it is to shaping the manga, I'm going to be reading out some incidents that were taking place around the same time. Number 1. Mori had an operation called Defense Force 356 Infantry Division, made solely to convince higher-ups that ability users made the perfect war weapons. However, as we know, he ultimately failed after Yosono had an intense mental breakdown and attempted to explode the ship they were on, likely to take herself out and whoever else wanted the sweet release of death at that time. Yosono would later go on to be arrested and later, as we know, rescued by Fukuzawa. Number 2. A lab in Germany was experimenting on ability users to try to create ones with a singularity that wouldn't require many people. For those who don't know, a singularity occurs when usually two abilities work hand in hand and create an even more powerful effect. Most common example of this is Shinsokoku. The reason for this is simple. They wanted to weaponize ability users as much as possible to have a weapon during the war. It's worth noting that Germany allied with France and Japan and shared this research with them. And France artificially created a man some of you might know as Paul Verlaine. Oh, and Japan did absolutely nothing else but then called it a day. Japan kidnapped society's most unwanted parasite, a ginger, and create a clone of him that harnessed an entity called Arahabaki and blah blah. Okay, I'm not turning this into a Stormbringer recap, okay? What, do you want this video to be 55 minutes long? That would be the origin of my dark... Oh my god, this is so... Do I have to read this entire thing? Okay. That would be the origin of my dark era and turn me into some kind of heartless cur or maybe some kind of beast. And I don't know, let's all hold hand and examine Dazai's entrance or some shit. How corny do you want me to be for this goddamn segment? Number 3. Fukushi is born as an antagonist. The government holds him high in honor, decorating him with badges and titles and giving him access to form the Hunting Dogs, an organization that is solely dedicated to capturing and detaining ability users. It's interesting to note that despite being an ability user himself, Fukushi has the Hunting Dogs treated as these criminals that could go off the rails at any time, leaving them dependent on surgeries to keep them alive and stop them from ever considering betrayal. It's a really well thought out nod to how contradictory he is to his own belief on wanting to rid the world of war. In the end, a peace treaty is signed by the relevant organizations. Fukuzawa Yukichi is hired to kill the bureaucrats who want to go forth with the war regardless, and that is the end of the Great War. Overall, I'd say that the way this event stretches on throughout the story of BSD itself, through its light novels and the way the universe works, is honestly so well thought out, and you guys will see that too soon as we switch to the next segment. Any day now. Any day. You're really taking your time on Okay, this segment was supposed to start with me saying chronologically speaking, but I wrote chronically speaking, so I guess we're speaking chronically. The earliest event that occurs post-war is the Untold Origins light novel, where, if you do the quick math, it would have logically ended 2 years ago, meaning that this is the very beginning of Japan recovering from the losses their society faced. And boy, did they face loss. Untold Origins is also the light novel that gives us the most insight on how society was affected post-war, and also my favorite light novel ever, so everybody log the fuck in for this. The Origins light novel begins with Rampo being sent to help out with the case where he meets Fukuzawa. I'm pretty sure we all know that song and dance by now, but what I see very few people talk about is a young Odasaku's presence here and the narration that follows. When he's first shown, these are Fukuzawa's thoughts. Yokohama assassins were extremely dangerous compared to other cities. Yokohama, the city of demons, had an influx of military parties from around the world, working together after the previous war. In the name of governance, they waved around their extraterritorial rights and each created their own autonomous region as they slowly encroached on Yokohama's territory. Therefore, Yokohama was gradually turning into a lawless district, even worse than it had been during wartime. So for all the people going, BSD has too many organizations, this is your explanation. With so many parties playing different roles to stake their claim on Yokohama, they divided by the territory they claimed. This is a pretty good explanation as to why we have the agency and the Port Mafia constantly on watch to make sure the crime rates stay down in the present manga. Of course, the crime rates are gonna be up after this huge war, and I appreciate how that's the reason why the agency is always going through something and not just, well, it's a manga and we need things to happen. Anyways, back to Odasaku. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why is this 14-year-old an assassin? Like, Kyoko was part of the mafia and that's why she was being trained under them, but this is way before Odasaku even joined the mafia, so what's he out here killing for? And on that note, why is Rampo also 14 looking for a job? Well, there's actually a reason for both of these things. After the war, an alarming number of children were left orphaned with the fact that so many people died at the standing line. For this reason, the government began compensating children financially and provided them special papers that gave them access to applying for a job. In fact, I'd even say Rampo's parents were likely assassinated due to some leftover feud, since he did mention that his father was a detective. As for Odasaku, he said that he was doing assassin work for as long as he remembers, and since the war ended logically 2 years ago, it's natural for him to simply continue doing what he was doing before. That's the kind of society Yokohama was at the time. That's why it's so crime-ridden. That's why we need the detective agency. And on that note, let's get into my favorite part of this war conflict. Have any of you ever noticed that the agency is really young? Like, half the members are just under 20 years old while the other half are just past that mark. In fact, not just the agency but the mafia as well. In both organizations, we have people in their early to mid-20s, then there's this giant hole, and then the rest of them are like 40. And have any of you ever stopped to wonder why that is? Well, I have, and the longer you think about it, the more fucked up it gets. A lot of people just say that Asagiri simply needs his twinks to be as young as possible for marketability. But in reality, it's because there was a war, you assholes. Think about it. Untold Origins literally spelled out that there was an alarming number of orphans after the war. So much so that companies needed children to fill the employment gap. The war wiped out a whole generation, and that is so messed up. That's why Kunekita is already gun-pow about having kids with his ideal wife at 22. He should be at the club. That's why Naomi is working at the agency at 16. She and Tanizaki don't have parents providing for them and need to make ends meet themselves. That's why Kenji is so lighthearted and happy about everything. Not only was he likely just 2 years old when the war ended, but instead of living in the crime-ridden city of Yokohama, he lived in a quiet, detached, and close-knit town. The child labor jokes are hilarious until you realize these kids aren't working because they want to, but because they need to provide for themselves as a necessity. It's likely that everyone in the agency lost their parents in the war. Atsushi isn't special. Well, you know what? It is canon that Dazai's parents are alive, but that's a discussion for another day. And the point is driven home even more when you look at the other non-Japanese organizations. Francis is literally just 32 and Po is 28. The Great War didn't involve America at all, and that's why we actually have people pushing past 26 here without putting one foot in the grave. In fact, the American organization being the financially extravagant one isn't just a stereotype for Americans, but it makes sense because literally every other organization faced some financial loss due to the war. And now let's look at the backstories. Atsushi is an unloved child without parents. Akutagawa is an unloved child without parents. Yosuno is an unloved child without parents. None of them have parents. The only person who has two loving parents in this entire series is Louisa. Who let that happen? And by the way, none of these jokes are to invalidate Atsushi's trauma. He was literally tortured by that ugly-ass abuser of his and everyone had it awful in their own way. This is not the Trauma Olympics. Anyways, yeah, society crumbled because of the very war that the anime makes a point never to reference, therefore making the entire premise of BSD a confused mess. Who would have guessed? But none of anything I've really told you defines the crux of the problem in Yokohama, and that is the treatment of ability users in society. So let's move on to... To start the segment, allow me to quote Untold Origins again. Due to the war, the number of skill users working legally decreased, and most of them either disappeared from the public eye or even started working for an underground organization. And now, once again, every time you read BSD and think there's way too many organizations here, you'd be correct because ability users quite literally were reduced to an oppressed minority after the war. In Untold Origins, the play that Rampo and Fukuzawa watch mentions these ability users, but they do it in a way that would make them sound like a mythical being so as to not get in trouble for mentioning them directly. And now let me ask you something. Is there even a single ability user in BSD that works a regular job? I'll give you a second to think. The answer is actually yes. Lucy works as a waitress, and on the surface it could be a regular job until of course you think about it deeper. The reason less and less ability users work legally was because no one would hire them to work regular jobs, and that's why so many of them turn to a life of crime. The only place an ability user could be a simple waitress is a place that actively allies with ability users like Cafe Uzumaki. Also, Lucy literally took part in the cannibalism and Sky Casino arc. She's no simple waitress but an ally to the agency. But back to the point, yes, there's no regular jobs for this oppressed minority. And if people might be wondering, why am I using the term oppressed for them when they seem to be doing just fine on their own? Well, look no further than Natsume Soseki. In Untold Origins, he's described as one of the very limited ability users who is authorized to give special permission for organizations in Japan to allow the hiring of multiple ability users. That's right, ability users need to be permitted to have a job, and by people that are almost impossible to reach. Chief Taneda is the person who provides Mori that very license, and his position is just as high as Natsume's in society. On top of that, let's discuss the agency for a second. Why does it take 3 seconds for people to turn on them? The best example is in Dazai's entrance exam when the Azure Apostle strikes and begins protesting against the agency's existence. Is everyone in Yokohama stupid, or has society shunned ability users so much since the war that people automatically jump to the offensive when they make the smallest slip-up? Remember, just 12 years before present-day BSD, people weren't allowed to mention that these ability users existed. And then there's the existence of the hunting dogs, this organization meant to hunt down ability users and ability users alone. But before them, not many people know this, but we had Shibusawa. In Dead Apple, there's a certain line about him that always makes me distinctly uncomfortable, but also it's painfully obvious that it's said by Chuya, and you'll see what I mean by that. But the government kept protecting him anyways. He was a valuable skill user who could counteract a nationwide invasion of skill users, so you just decided to look the other way, no matter how many people he killed overseas. Shibusawa was allowed to kill as many people as he wanted just because he was good at detaining the plague that ability users were to society. Quite literally, he was the hunting dogs before the hunting dogs. They wouldn't need to be created if he were still alive. A final example I like to give is in the Sky Casino, specifically what's guarding it. Okay, so we have the usual stuff like security guards, a giant missile gun weapon, an emergency plane, and a convenient shotgun made specifically for ability users just in case they step out of line. Good job, Sigma, you're racist. It is infinitely disgusting the more you think about it, especially when you realize that ability users weren't the main cause of the suffering of the war. It was governments, it was organizations like the Transcendence and the Order of the Clock Tower. It was them using ability users as weapons. It was them literally creating ability users in a lab to make them more efficient for war. But as Fyodor said, humans will always find a person to blame. And who was society going to blame? The governments and organizations that they can't reach or actively discriminate against? Or the people born with these magical powers that made them stronger than regular humans? The answer is so simple. And so, the society that BSD is born. A society where the only organization legally built to help people in need is the organization that pays the least. A society where the mafia exists to make sure their world doesn't go back to the crime-ridden place it was before, are risking their lives for the very people that turn on them at the smallest mistake. When Fukuzawa confronts Fyodor, he says that humans will always choose good when that's not the truth.
Actually, no, that's not the truth.
Fukuzawa. But why is this old-ass man so oblivious? Well, that's because Fukuzawa never went to the war. He never watched his comrades die in his arms like Fukuji, he never led Legion to endless death and revival like Mori, and he never faced the loss of war himself, only hearing about it after. Fukuzawa is so oblivious to how humans truly are, and that's why he believes in the goodness that doesn't exist. He's blind to the extent that humans will go to just to find a common enemy. And that's what Fyodor wants. He doesn't want ability users that are shoved to the side until they need to be used. He wants them gone not because he's some evil racist demon, but to prevent everything that the war led to. To prevent another girl like Yosano, or a boy like Chuya, or a non-binary person like Kyu. And it's logical, isn't it? No ability users would mean nothing to use as these weapons of chaos and destruction. Except Fyodor is wrong. Humanity will always find a common enemy to discriminate against, and that, kiddos, is called racism. So what's the ending here? What's the big ending video speech about how ability users can defeat discrimination by being such amazing people? Well, chances are that's not gonna happen. That's because the agency never has been advocating exclusively for the rights of ability users. They simply exist to help those in need regardless of who they are. And even when that backfires on them, they continue to help people because that's who they are. Kind individuals who could have easily turned to a life of crime but chose to be better people. And it's because of that kindness that Aya believed them when no one else did. It's why so many people defended Rampo against the military forces, and it's why Fyodor is wrong. I don't doubt that there's some kindness hidden away by the years and years he's watched this exact scenario happen that he's come to this conclusion. People are forgetting the major thing about him. Asagiri himself had described Shunzen Tachihara, aka Fraud McGuy I don't like, as a good version of Fyodor. This is because they both have been killed and revived many times. But there's no release of death for Fyodor. He will die and he will be revived over and over again, thousands of more times than the soldiers in the war. And what did just a fraction of his suffering do to Shunzen? It drove him to the point that he blindly blamed Yosuno because his muddled mind could only see her as a viable answer for his suffering. Just as Fyodor only sees ability users as that answer. If they're gone, suffering will stop. And just like Shunzen Tachihara, Fyodor is wrong. Humans will not choose goodness, that may be true, but they will slowly adapt just as our very real society does. They will find hope in the smallest things, and the agency's unrelenting kindness has already changed the hearts of so many. Yes, it's a slow process, but I believe in Atsushi and I believe in the message he's here to give. And so, I believe that where BSD won't end with a better world, it will end with more people willing to make that world themselves. Did any of you notice, perchance, that look a little bit different? That's right, the little sprites that I used in this video were made by the lovely Mimi, aka Rats Kent, letter W1 on Twitter. And guys, just go follow her. I love supporting small artists that have 0 followers. I feel so bad for her. Anyways, hi everyone. Thank you so much for 10k subs. I remember I reached it and I was losing my mind because that is an insane number. Thank you so much for 10k. You guys are amazing. And I really don't deserve that many people. 10,000 of you have hit the subscribe button. But yes, you might be wondering also, Cash, where the hell have you been? Well, unfortunately, my country is at war, so I'm a little bit busy and preoccupied with stuff in my IRL life. But that doesn't mean it's gonna stop the grind, bitches. That's right, I'm never gonna stop making videos unless I die. I hope I don't die. Anyways, please remember to do all the stuff that I always tell you to do for Turkish women, for Palestine, and for Pakistan too. Please educate yourselves on the matter. I retweet posts on my Twitter all the time about the matter in my country. Just, stay educated and stay safe. Everyone who's going through tough times right now. Okay, I guess I have to make an official announcement about this one. Yes, there will be a ship tier this video. And yes, it is the 10k special. And yes, you guys won. So I hope you're happy that I'm gonna die because of you people. Anyways, I guess I'll see you then, because that's gonna be my next video. Bye-bye.